Automotive Logistics and Supply Chain Global Live. We're coming at the end. We have a last final panel here with some great leaders who I'm going to introduce to you momentarily. But again, I wanted to thank all of you for staying with us and to our audience who've been following this at home or in the office around the world. We've had hundreds of people throughout the last 2 days watching online as well. So that's really helped to expand our audience. And all of this content actually will be available on the platform, on our virtual event platform. So all of you who are registered, who have downloaded the app, you can, for example, go into the app, into the sessions, and you'll be able to find to go back and review what you might have missed or pick up things that you really found interesting. This session we're going to be talking about strategies for success. Clearly disruption has dominated the conversation over the past 2 days and mitigation strategies for that, and I'm sure we'll touch on that as well. But wherever possible, we're going to try and look ahead, how we can shape supply chain and logistics organizations to be fit for purpose. We've seen a lot of change as something we're going to talk about in terms of how companies are organizing themselves at car makers, how they're working across departments, more cross-functional, and also with the suppliers and logistics providers. Clearly, we want to look ahead at things as well, like sustainability, electrification, which are obviously will soon start to reshape the supply chain map in North America and beyond. So really pleased to have here with us today in the room, George Grahovac from George, very much thank you for joining us. Welcoming back Chris Stiles from yesterday as well. Thank you, Chris. And beamed in from Plano, Texas, Steve Brown, VP Parts Supply and Logistics from Toyota North America. And of course, welcoming back Anu Goel, who just had that great discussion on leadership from Volkswagen. Thanks again, Anu. So I wanted to start, as I mentioned, a little bit on our on the organizations in supply chain, because I think we've noted some trends and changes in various organizations. And George, I'm going to start with you because I think your role has shifted a bit somewhat since we've last spoke. And then I just would like to talk to each of the panel a bit about how those roles have been changing, because we know there's been other changes too. So George, let's start with you.
Sure. Well, first of all, Chris, thank you very much for having the opportunity to be back here. It's fantastic that we're all able to get back together again, face to face. You know, I was talking to somebody earlier and we said, you know, enough with the Zoom. It's really time to get back face to face. I know that we've been through a lot in the last year and a half or so, but it is good to be here in person. We have, as Honda, we have had a dramatic shift in our organization, arguably overdue. But effective with this fiscal year, April 1st, we started a new organization, Honda Development Manufacturing of America, where we brought all the manufacturing operations and development operations for one entity, one organization, and then aligned all the related functions. Supply chain, of course, was one of those functions. I'm within that business unit, and you know, we're 6 months into this thing, and of course we've been spending a lot of our time in just working through the crises and not as much time as we'd like on maturing the organization towards what some of our goals were to increase the efficiencies and effectiveness. But it's been good to have everybody under one roof, common business plans, working towards common approaches, common processes, eventually common systems. And it's a breath of fresh air, and really we think we're positioned well for moving forward with future challenges.
Great, thanks, George. Let's go one here in the room and one virtual. So Steve Brown from Toyota. I think since we've spoken, there's been some changes in the logistics organization, including across production parts and service parts. So why don't you talk to us a little bit more about how the Toyota organization has evolved?
Yeah, Chris. Good to hear from everybody. Hey, first let me say I joined some of the sessions yesterday and they were outstanding. Really, really informative sessions. So I appreciate the work around that. And also, let me take a minute to recognize all the supply chain professionals out there. I mean, what an extraordinary 2 years we've had, from COVID shutdowns for supplier capacity, winter storms in the U.S., port delays, all those things. And I just wanted to thank everybody out there who's keeping the supply chain going. It's in all of our best interest to keep the auto production and commerce moving. So thanks everybody for that. From a organization perspective, we did make a change, but it's been a while. It was back at the end of 2018. Previously, our logistics manufacturing side was inside of overall supply chain we call demand and supply. And what we did was we took the manufacturing logistics side and we combined it with our service parts supply chain side. So we put those two together. And we left our vehicle supply chain with the demand and supply side, the production planning side, basically. And that happened in 2019. That was a big change. And honestly, it's been a big benefit for us as we've gone through this kind of dynamic environment. We've been able to take those resources, things like route planning, design packaging, operations management methods, and kind of combine the best of both worlds. Also, we look at new systems and that type of thing. We're able to compare and consider both situations and both supply chains from service and from the manufacturing side. So it's been a really good experience. We haven't had a chance to breathe to say, okay, do we want to change it more? But it's been good, and that's probably the biggest change that's happened over the last 3 years.
Thank you very much, Steve. And I think I'll give it a chance to echo, and I think I think I saw George clapping as well. So just to acknowledge what you said as well, thanking the supply chain community indeed for everything that has happened, and thank you as well for the kind words about the event. Chris, since we spoke, well, not since yesterday, maybe something's happened since then, but since we had you on our virtual show last year, you took a new role, and maybe tell us a little bit about the organization and if it's evolving even as we speak, given the disruption across the supply chain.
Yeah, it's evolving a bit, and it's a bit different maybe from some of the counterparts here. We had the after-sales, for example, the service parts within our supply chain kind of realm. We separated that back out, but we still work directly with them on any synergies or anything like that. But it's more about really the day-to-day. There's a lot more interaction with the sales and marketing teams in general when it comes to production planning and sales forecasting and really just meeting with, I'll call them my counterparts, but they're really part of the team now. Technically, they sit in the sales and marketing function, but they're in the day-to-day discussions of what we're doing from a supply chain standpoint, whether it's, like I said, what are we doing in the plants, what are we building, and then what do we need to do to fulfill the demand that they're seeing on their side. So I think it's continuing to evolve. We've also, from a regional standpoint, again, we've brought back in South America into our region. So now it's really more of an America's total region. So doing a lot more kind of interaction with our counterparts, not just Mexico anymore, but all the way throughout South America as well. Yeah.
Interesting. I mean, it's always interesting to see how each organization evolves, but I think that the common thread certainly seems to be that integration and sharing of information across departments. We'll talk a bit more about it. I knew, we just spent some time speaking with you, obviously, about leadership approaches and that, but is there anything else in the organization as such which has changed? You also have vehicle logistics and service parts. That's a change that happened some time ago. So actually that's interesting just there, just between the departments here, the company is quite a different spread. But Anu, do you want to talk to us about any other evolutions you would note?
Yeah, I mean, just real quick, right? So we're at Volkswagen Group, we're a group function. The brands are national sales companies, and we are responsible for things that it makes little to no sense for each brand to do individually. Makes no sense for VW, Audi, et cetera, to have different ports. So we're responsible for that. Same with the service parts logistics network. Same with service workshop and technology, customer relationship management, those types of things. There have been 2 changes to my team and direct areas responsibility over the last 6 to 8 months. Our arguably, both of them are pandemic type related or reactions. One is we restructured and we created a position for cross-border vehicle logistics. And in code words, that's coordination between US, Canada, Mexico, because every country was working towards what made best sense for them. And in the pandemic, that doesn't necessarily work. So we've got Scott Maybury now, who's responsible for cross-border logistics. And then second, being a group function, we're actually in a unique situation where we see how each brand does different things, right? Company-wide. So Scott had asked me and the team to lead an initiative that we call Reinventing for the New Normal, and identify areas, processes, efficiencies, synergies, company-wide in a new business environment, right? Which is another way of saying I'm making friends with a lot of my peers. Because you take a hard look at how things are doing and where we create pain for each other that in the past was accepted, but going forward, you can't allow to keep happening. So we've got 2 new direct reports to our team through me, tied into what's transpired over the last 17 months.
Thanks for that. And again, as noted, we see that evolution. Some of it perhaps directly pandemic related, perhaps more of it overall, as I mentioned previously, this move towards integrating functions and departments and sharing information. And on that sort of note, I'm interested in how your organizations or your supply chains are capturing and integrating the data. And I want to start with you, Chris. We referred to this yesterday. I know that there's been a cloud transformation this is also predates pandemic, I believe, part of an ongoing journey. Can you give us a kind of snapshot about what the strategy from the system side is?
Well, I think something that we all deal with is how do we get from the legacy systems that we all operate with that have been around for 30 years or whatever into what's really out there now from a really, kind of totally different level of tools that we can use. So it's how do you kind of leapfrog from where we've been forever and what's worked into something that's going to be much more data-driven decisions. So trying to prioritize where we're investing and to get the biggest bang for the buck and kind of the quickest impact, especially given what we're dealing with now with what we talked about yesterday as far as visibility, inventory optimization. When you're talking about parts inventory, where do you need to be lean? Where do you need to be safer? So really trying to figure out what are the right tools that we want to do next for the short term, and then obviously looking to the 3 to 5 year plan beyond that as well.
And maybe I'll go to you, Steve, to follow up on that. Is there, with your more integrated service parts and production parts department and this view, are you also making moves to integrate data, move from some legacy systems, for example, in terms of your supply chain and logistics?
Yeah, I think that's definitely something that we were all probably considering. One thing, we talk about single source of truth. When you talk about supply chain, that truth is only as good as the operation. They have to execute, right? That or it can really mess up that data throughout the supply chain. So those are the kinds of things we're thinking about. How do we improve that? How do we create that discipline throughout the supply chain so that we can count on that data? I think as Chris mentioned, the legacy system, that's definitely something that we're looking at how to handle. We're looking at big data. We're using that for a lot of our information, especially on the service parts side. There's a lot of legacy systems there that we're considering. Manufacturing has been on a journey for several years to fully visualize the supply chain. So we're just continuing to execute and work on that side of it. So that's kind of where we're at. The COVID, it did change some of our priorities. I think kind of Chris mentioned this. It kind of made us focus in on what was priority from an IT perspective. Some of these things that we thought maybe we could wait a year, all of a sudden we couldn't. And we had to push those ahead and really made us prioritize based on the current environment.
George, at Honda, have you also, in terms of the single source of truth?
Yeah, so I think we've all been on this journey, if you will, for a couple years now of, as Chris mentioned, getting out of the legacy mode and moving towards more connected and robust tools. In some cases, we're even rethinking our ERP system completely, and we're finding from design to operation to sales how much disconnectedness we actually have, and we're learning from it. And I think what the crises has done, and the continued crises, is you tend to learn more because you have people that are diving into the data. They're expected to bring the data and present, and we're learning from one another. I mean, we're having daily risk calls where we're going plant by plant and understanding coverage and deep into the tier one structure. So, you know, unfortunately, I think some of my colleagues might have done a little bit better job from the last crises. I don't think as Honda we learned as much as we could have. Fukushima being probably the latest, but what we continue to find is we just don't have enough visibility into our tier 2, tier 3 structures. And now the microchip is bringing that to the forefront. But again, we're learning from it, and we'll use this as an opportunity along with the greater strategy of the company, the enterprise solution strategy, and try to pull all of this together. Now, I will say that we have been on a campaign of data quality and data governance, and understanding that because in our previous life, the different organizations, everybody was marching to their own tune, in some cases managing the same data sets, in some cases okay, in other cases not so well. Now that we're under one organization, we have the ability to try to execute data quality and performance a little bit better. And finally, I'll say to all the suppliers and the vendors out there of solutions, there's a lot of great stuff out there. There really is. The question is how to get that merged together. We and maybe I shouldn't speak for everybody, but I'll speak for myself. I get approached 5 to 10 times a day by a solution provider, but usually it's providing a solution for this one area, and it's really tough for us to evaluate that one-off solution, if you will. So really we're trying to think in terms of, can we partner with somebody that can partner with somebody else to bring maybe a suite of products to us to evaluate together. So,
thank you. Anu, is there anything you would add to the discussion on that point?
Yeah, I mean, just a quick add, right? I mean, we could be, you know, everything my counterpart's been saying applies. One of the things I've learned is the system's only as good as the data that's fed into it. And, you know, one of my big learnings is the definition of dwell time, the definition of fill rates between US, Canada, and Mexico are all different. Everyone's got a definition of that metric that you can argue makes themselves look better than they are. And until you harmonize the definition of the KPI, none of the systems or whatever matter. So with Scott in his role, one of the deals is to harmonize the KPIs, right? How do you define cost per car for vehicle logistics? How do you define dwell time? Let's get that aligned, and then we'll feed it into all these, you know, I get the same thing. I get 7 calls a day from solutions providers, right? Volkswagen's real big on building their own systems, but let's get the data right, and then we'll, right, as we move to the next step. If not, it's garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah. Yes, absolutely. There's something Chris said yesterday when we were talking about the semiconductor supply chains, and I think Chris said he wants to be invisible in the supply chain, at least it is an organization. Clearly at the moment, if talking to the chairman quite a bit, so that's probably not the case. But in general, though, so I guess I know Chris's answer to this question, but my question is similar to what I spoke with Kelly Bysouth, Chief Supply Chain Officer of IAC yesterday morning. Actually, can some of this heighten visibility of the supply chain. And I don't mean, in this case, the tier supply chain. I mean the headlines, the world paying attention to the problems that we're having. The highest levels of companies paying attention to what's happening in the supply chain. I know it's not for the right reasons, but can this visibility become useful in a way, if you like, as a means to accelerate other changes that maybe we know we've needed to do? Or in fact, is it really just, talking about the problems that we don't want to have, so to speak? I'll start with you on that, Steve.
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think, like most of the people in the room, and as any supply chain professional, we prefer to be low profile, right? That means everything is good, our customers are happy, that type of thing. But the current environment definitely is giving us a chance to be more visible. And Toyota, because of the nature of Toyota production system, the supply chain naturally gets a fair amount of attention. It's just the way it works. But with that being said, at the beginning of COVID, and I'm sure everybody experienced this, shutting everything down in the U.S., right, and then having to restart everything during the quarantine period, that was a pretty big activity that really had a lot of visibility for my organization, because we had to handle the Kanban situation, we had to stop logistics, all those things. So everybody wanted to understand how that was going to work, what we were going to do, how we were going to supply prepare the suppliers, those kinds of things. So from that perspective, I think it's been good, and as we've gone through the last year or so with all the issues, all of the supply chain functions are getting a lot of visibility, including purchasing, of course, vehicle, logistics, and demand and supply from a product perspective. Everyone's very engaged and collaborative. So I think that's been a good thing, because everyone can see how the whole system works. And as we go and about looking at, what we need for the future, I think it'll help everyone understand, some of the background of what the supply chain goes through. So I think it's been a very positive from that perspective.
Thanks very much. Anybody else want to comment further? You don't all have to if you don't want to, but if there's anyone who would want to. Chris, I know you want to stay invisible, so I...
You got mine, sir.
I'll put it another way, because this tends to split panels as well. Anu, do you see that supply chain logistics could and should be a competitive advantage?
Being professionals in this, we'd like to think that yes, we are a competitive advantage to our companies in terms of what we do, right? So if you take the vehicle logistics side, how do you define a competitive advantage, right? We're getting a car from one place to the other in a sellable condition, right? High quality condition at a lower cost, right? Okay. Are we going to really get a competitive advantage there? The value add that we bring in with our ports is the accessorization, right? So that can help. On the parts side, how do you define competitive advantage, right? It's fix it right the first time at the dealerships. And do you have high fill rates and good service levels and things like that, right? That's how we define it. The question always is, right, when we look at the benchmarking, if we're ranked number one, number two, does that translate to customer satisfaction and increased sales? And you could debate that at length. It's intuitive to say, yes, it does, but then try getting that data. One of the things that we pride ourselves on is through the pandemic, we've done a pretty good job of keeping our service fill rates at a pretty high level, above some of our counterparts. The question it begs is, are our KPIs set at the right level? What is competitive advantage, and are they set at the right level? And that's the conversation that we're having now, going forward, right? So yes, we want to provide a competitive advantage. The question is, are the KPIs and what we've been striving for pre-pandemic the ones that will give us that advantage in the new normal? So a lot of different thinking going on in that realm.
So I know from the last session that Anu doesn't like the word new normal, although he did just use it, or as I've been referring to it as the new never normal. Well, what I wanted to ask your opinion on to the panel, starting with George, to what extent are you using the information that we have now, the rates, these kind of changing lead times, for longer term decision making? Because that must, I guess I should back that up. Do you anticipate, can you make decisions right now with the current situation, or do we need longer to see before we influence it?
Yeah, so, I'll start with maybe going back a couple questions. The old phrase, never let a good crisis go to waste. I think there's a lot of emphasis on the supply chain. We meet with our executives formally on a weekly basis. There's more visibility in the supply chain of our business now than there's been in years. So that's a wonderful thing. It's a wonderful thing and a challenging thing all at the same time. But it is, through this, it is bringing learning and understanding to our execs. So when we're bringing forth business plans and resource plans and setting conditions for 3 and 6 year plans, we're not getting deer in the headlight looks from the executive team. They're understanding it because effectively we're giving them updates on a weekly basis. So we don't have a crystal ball, and that's why we're meeting on a weekly basis, and we're effectively at an SP&P adjustment on a weekly basis right now, even though we're still, trying to fix our schedules out a little bit longer. But we are cognizant of the fact that, for example, port delays are going to continue, shipping costs are going up, transportation, domestic transportation and drivers are going to continue to be a challenge, keeping our carriers busy and making sure that we're a company that carriers want to do business with. We understand that all of those are challenges and they roll up, and we have to make a set of assumptions based on where we're going to be. But again, understanding what's going on today and the continued education, it helps in making that sales pitch to the executive team.
Steve, what about you? Is this new normal starting already to influence longer term decisions, or is it requiring just that, as George alluded to, just that extreme flexibility in changing the network?
Yeah, I think we're on a similar path as George mentioned. I mean, if you think about it, and yesterday there was a good session from Eaton that talked about, when we get back to normal. And of course, even in that session that, that was described, it's who knows, right? We don't know when we'll be back to normal, what normal will look like. But I think we all know that we've been very flexible through this period, and we have to make sure that we can continue to do that, but we need to be more effective at it. So how do we prepare the organization? How do we get those systems in place so we can, move quicker to be flexible? I think even the customer may have changed through this situation because of what's available in product. And I think you'll see more customization, that type of thing. So I think supply chain, logistics, parts ordering and management, all those things are going to have to continue to develop flexibility as we move out of this.
Chris, as head of the supply chain management department at Nissan, is S&OP, these kind of things, core functions in your team? Is that something that I've talked to other OEMs who are really looking to enhance this, and perhaps automotive wasn't always as advanced as others. So is that something in focus for you?
Yeah, it is definitely more in focus now, and we've actually been, I don't want to say toying around with it, but we have been for probably the past 3 or 4 years. But it's really kind of taken a much more forefront kind of view right now with everything we're all dealing with. One thing we did about 3 or 4 years ago, we implemented what we call logistics systems and strategy team. That's all they do. They focus on where do we need to be in 3 to 5 years, from technology tools, from what are the capabilities that our supply chain team needs, and that's what that team does. Because before it was really kind of a side job, right? For all of our operations folks, that was something they needed to be looking at. So we separated it, we formed a team, and we've continued growing that team, and that's what they focus on. S&OP is part of that, but it's really, we're seeing the benefits of it now. And to George's point, we're getting our voices heard much faster right now with our executives as well, as far as the deer in the headlights version before. Now they're understanding what we need, so it's a big difference.
So there's some benefits to being seen after all in the supply chain.
Yeah.
Fantastic. we've talked about this several times during the event, and I always preface the question by knowing that it's oversimplified when I put it this way, but do some of the just-in-time lean inventory processes that are so essential to our automotive supply chains and the working capital required and cash flow, etc. Are some of them under further consideration, let's say? We hear a lot of talk about just in case and different sorts of buzzwords around that. I'm just interested from your view as senior leaders in supply chain. I'm going to start with Steve, since just in time and TPS is so essential to Toyota. I just interested in your perspective on that.
Great question, Chris. I think, honestly, I don't know any other way, so it's hard for me to say, is it the best way or not the best way, but, I'm very biased, and I really think, the way we do things really served us well during the COVID shutdown and since then, because it, basically, in this very dynamic situation, things are changing so quickly. It does give us visibility very quickly of the condition. And, those kinds of risk and warning signs very early in the supply chain can help us move to take some action to manage those situations. So I'm a big believer that it's the best way to go from my perspective. But, what do we ever do anything to manage those risks that maybe it's a little bit different? And of course we do, right? There's always situations, and we need to be able to forecast those types of risks, working with our purchasing team and our plants to say, okay, what should we do with those situations? For example, port delays. Port delays are happening more and more frequently. So how do we prepare day supply for overseas inbound freight so that we don't jeopardize production? And those kinds of things we do consider. I think someone said yesterday, of course, you don't want to pile onto a bottleneck that it won't help you, right? So you have to be ahead of those types of things, and you have to make sure that if you're going to increase some inventory, that it's not sitting in the wrong place, for example, right? So there's a lot of things to think about. Of course, those types of situations. If a supplier's struggling, obviously we'll consider having some inventory to make sure that we can support them if they have go through a rough patch, that type of thing. So we do make adjustments, and it's not always just pure, but my opinion, just in time has been very it's been a good way to go during this whole situation.
George or Chris, anything you'd want to add?
Yeah, I think Honda's been a very lean inventory company for many years, and almost to a fault, where our ordering plans are tied to our production plans. So sometimes the smallest blip out of one of the factories sends rippling effects all the way back to the supply base. And I think, again, with the crises, it's given us an opportunity to think about problems we've had in the past, new problems with the crises, and quite frankly, having our face right up against the fence on many of our supply chains and parts. But it's also given us an opportunity, and it will continue to give us an opportunity to think about how we should be doing business holistically with our customer. Obviously, our CBU inventories are completely drained right now, so it's really giving our sales guys an opportunity to look at how should we be doing business in the future from a CBU order standpoint, all the way back through the supply chain, and including raw materials. So. Quite frankly, we're gonna be taking a hard look at it over the next few cycles here.
Anu, I can imagine that last point perhaps rings true. Obviously, on the outbound side, everyone is at pretty much record low inventory. I mean, we usually didn't want to be as lean perhaps on that side as we are now. But how is it changing your perspective in Volkswagen?
I mean, it's an interesting question. It's got multiple facets, so I'll try to be short. On the vehicle logistics side, in the U.S., right, we're a different market. We like to have inventory on the ground at dealerships, right, for customers to have choices. And depending on which OE you are, you run 50, 60, 70, 80 days worth of inventory. We're down in the 30 range now, okay? So we've created a interesting situation, because each day of inventory is, pick a number, 8 digits without decimal points in working capital. So the questions now being asked is, hey, can I keep supporting sales with half the inventory I typically carried, right? And what has to happen in the supply chain to support that type of inventory. So levels that pre-pandemic we would have said, yep, are not achievable, or this is what the market needs to hit its sales targets, are now being brought into question. Remember, we're 40% of the company's cost base. So the visibility we used to get before was cost task, right? That mentality has now changed. So that's where we add value. So that's on the vehicle logistics side. On the parts side, it's another interesting dilemma, right? Bring the inventory levels down just in time, as my colleagues have said, and they're better at it than we are. So, you run as lean as you can, but then when you run lean and you run out, which is the wrong lean, people say, why didn't you carry more inventory? Because now you're hurting my parts sales at dealerships, right? So had you known. So where's my crystal ball that says I was going to run out of steering gears because demand went up 400% in the pandemic, right? So you got all those things going on, and the stuff with big data. I love it. The question to me always becomes, is it paralysis by analysis? What are you doing with the data, right? So limit it so you can understand it, put it in a digestible form and move forward. So it's just opened a lot more questions, and I think if we approach it right, it's created opportunities to do things that we never, ever would have thought of doing, right? So on the SLP side that you mentioned earlier, it always used to be, hey, supply chain, you got to figure out how to move what sales needs as efficiently as you possibly can. Now the question's flipped and says, what's happening up front that's causing you problems in the supply chain? Right? Why do I have 2018 vehicles sitting in the ports blocking parking spots? Right? So take the pandemic and view it as opportunities to improve what we do for a living.
Anything you'd want to add, Chris?
No, I mean, several very relative comments, obviously, I think across all of us. And when you talk about, lean or just in time, to me, it's very dependent on each part. I mean, so lean means something different to me on each part. And really that's the way we have to look at it. And then on the outbound side, on the product availability side, there's a huge shift now that's already occurred that none of us will be back to stuffing dealers. I used to call it the Walmart model, and then it was the Amazon model where you could show up at a dealer and you had your pick of anything you wanted, right? That's gone. So, I mean, it's really changed, I think. You asked about the competitive advantage. There is a bit of a competitive advantage there because the Honda dealer, the Toyota dealer, the Volkswagen dealer, the Nissan dealer are normally very close to each other. So if the customer is accustomed to showing up and finding that color, that version, whatever they want, and it's not there, then they're going to go next door, or they're going to go next door. And so I think there's somewhat of a competitive advantage on how we each kind of are able to have the right products there. But I think the overall kind of availability of what's going to be out there now, it's completely changed.
Yeah, absolutely. I realize we're running slightly over time, but hopefully maybe just a few more questions whilst we have everyone here. One thing I wanted to touch upon is the electrification plans that are coming. Now every company has different roadmap to a certain extent, although increasingly we're starting to see the targets longer term somewhat align, become a bit clearer at a regional basis. And when we look at it in the supply chain, it's always a question of how important do you think this becomes to how you will manage and design your logistics networks too. There's different considerations, perhaps different part types, different regulations in some cases as well. Chris, I want to start with you there, since Nissan probably has the most experience already in building electric vehicles in the US for some time and looking ahead. And so, how do you see that changing the way you operate in the coming decade as this expands?
I don't know that it really changes kind of the core operational foundation that we do. Because at the end of the day, we're moving parts, we're moving vehicles, right? So I don't know that it really has changed, even from the EVs that we've been doing now for a number of years, that it really would have that much of an impact. I mean, I think it's probably going to be more on the back end side, from an after-sales standpoint, from a return standpoint, things like that may have to figure out new optimization techniques and ways to adjust, but I don't know that it really changes the fundamentals for us. Yeah.
Yeah, it's not an uncommon response that I hear from those who are doing it, so to speak. But I mean, what we do see is new investments coming in places, and if we look at Honda partnering with GM, and on the battery side, it'll also change. So again, George, when you're looking out a bit more long term, is this changing at least the way you consider the relationships or footprints?
Yeah, and it kind of goes back to that competitive question. I am squarely in the camp of working together to find common solutions. A lot of us share the same supply base. We share the same partners in many cases, 3PL partners, carrier partners. In some cases, Steve and I are sharing freight coming into a cross dock. We have opportunities, and with this, as you mentioned, the GM relationship now, we're really riding that line, and we're constantly testing what is competitive, what's not competitive, and maybe more importantly, how do other people judge us against being competitive versus non-competitive. But it's going to change things. Honda, for example, we have powertrain facilities in the U.S., and we're going to have to figure out what to do with those powertrain facilities. Are we going to turn them into electric vehicle component facilities, for example? So those type of discussions are going on right now. We tend to have more import parts on our ICE vehicles for the powertrain. So that's going to be a bit of a shift for us as well. But like Chris said, I mean, for the most part, a part is a part, and you have to move it from point A to point B, although in an EV vehicle, less parts, obviously, than an ICE vehicle, not as heavy parts generally, but there's going to be some different dynamics that we'll have to think about for sure.
And I knew Volkswagen is undergoing a huge transformation globally. Here in North America, of course, Chattanooga gearing up to build EVs. We're importing the ID4 now. So, early reflections of so far, and then planning a bit more long term. How do you see this?
Yeah, I mean, he's just building upon, some of the colleagues that said on this call. Storage and handling changes. Your compliance becomes a big issue with hazardous materials, right? So are you going to service full batteries? Are you going to service modules, right? Those types of things. So in the parts depots, that changes. If you go into the ports, what level of charge are vehicles leaving the ports at, right? So if you're delivering a vehicle to a dealership, in the past, on the occasions where it arrived with low fuel or no fuel, right? You grab a little gas container, you go put a gallon in the car, and you take it off the truck. How do you get an electric vehicle off a truck with a dead battery or with no charge? Right? So it's going to get us into a couple areas that, situations that pop up that we may not anticipate or thought about, right? So a part is a part, absolutely agree. A vehicle is a vehicle, but there's going to be different situations that we all have to learn with, new partnerships. I think it also opens up some, people are concerned about impact on part sales. There's no oil changes, spark plugs, right? Maintenance and light repair, fine. I view it as an opportunity because customers with ICE vehicles have many aftermarket options. With electric vehicles, our dealer is going to have a captive audience for X period of time, right? So here's an opportunity to grow loyalty and retention with customers on that end of it. So it's early days. We've put a lot of thought and planning into it, and we're implementing various things, but it will change business and get us to think differently. The other question becomes some of those things that we reinvent to handle electric vehicles and parts to service those vehicles. Do they have applicability to ICE vehicles? So processes that we never would have thought of that could apply, right? Because a part's a part. So, I mean, it's exciting, and this gets back to what we were talking about in the earlier session. It's an interesting time to be in the business, right? Kind of we dip the toe into each pond here.
Absolutely. And Steve, I mean, Toyota is an interesting case because obviously long-time hybridization, so that's production coming into US as well. So I guess if nothing else, we see the complexity and variety of powertrain mix. But so is that an influencing factor for your supply chain and logistics, in the coming years?
Yeah, definitely. All the comments that were made around battery handling, all those things that we're considering. Of course, hybrid production, we're probably going to be at 25% sales in hybrid this year. So we have a lot of battery handling already that we're having to do. But the electric vehicles that we're producing and selling, we're going to have to continue to develop that. But as you mentioned, starting in 2023, we're going to be building fuel cell assembly that are going to go to power heavy-duty trucks in our Kentucky plant. So, our team's definitely going to manage that inbound and outbound. So that's going to be a big challenge for us and something we're working on now.
Yeah. So maybe that's the last question, is to touch upon the role of sustainability in the supply chain. I know that could perhaps be a whole other conference, let alone a last final thoughts and a question. But I guess to put it more to the point would be, to what extent do you see sustainability, logistics, and supply chain becoming more of a determining factor, KPI, et cetera, in the decisions that you make in the supply chain? And maybe I'll start with you, Chris, on that.
Well, first of all, we measure it. It is a KPI. It's been a KPI for several years. We measure it globally and then all the way down to each of the regions. And we look at kind of the progress that we've been able to make on really kind of emissions and really understanding, are we impacting something there to improve? So from that standpoint, that KPI is going to continue. I think it's probably going to get more and more enhanced as we keep promoting the sustainability. That's obviously, it's a huge promotion for Nissan, is sustainability. And then the whole EV side, I think, is just going to keep driving kind of that storyline, right? That it's not just the vehicle, it's the whole process that goes into the products, that we're providing. So, and then that's going to be part of it for sure. Yeah.
And Anu, on that point, I think, that's already been partly a Volkswagen strategy with the ID4, isn't it? Well, and with the ID series in terms of carbon neutrality and even with the vehicle logistics. So, there's one example, but how do you see it as a determining factor in your logistics decisions in future?
I think it's significant, it's huge, and anyone that underestimates is going to miss out, right? Companies can say, we're doing it because, it's the right thing to do, corporate citizenship. Customers like doing business with companies that place sustainability and eco-friendliness at the forefront, right? Okay, fine. Then you get the companies that do it because there's legislation and it's evolving, right? So why do you as a company do it? At the end of the day, it's here, it's a reality. It is the right thing to do. Customers do value companies that support it, and if you don't watch it, legislation will catch you off guard, and you're not going to be able to do business the way you want to do it. So there's a lot going on in this realm. I think the KPI discussion is very interesting. We are in our infancy in that, and it's evolving, and we're learning things, right? We've got LNG vessels bringing vehicles in from Europe now, right? Small, right? Side note. The Port of Houston, the channel up to the port is not wide enough for them to go side by side, so the Port of Houston cannot accommodate the vessels that were put into the fleet to reduce our footprint, right? Now what do you do, right? So how do you get in that situation? Those are kinds of things that just pop up, and you got to go figure out. One option is don't use those vessels. Wrong answer, right? You got to make sure everything's tied in to make this work as a corporate strategy. You can't achieve this as a one-off from one function.
Yeah. Very true indeed. And George, would you add anything to this?
Very similar to the comments. Honda's been a company that's striven to be a very green company for many years. In all the products, we've measured CO2 emissions out of domestic transportation routes, for example, for many, many years. But I think we're going to continue to turn the wheel on trying to tie it all together. And then Obviously, the big one moving forward is recyclability, battery recyclability, and other rare earth material recyclability as we move forward.
Yeah. Yeah, we've seen already some big investments coming on that circular economy side of the battery chain. Steve, perhaps as you, I know we've spoken as well that sustainability and logistics is certainly becoming a bigger priority for Toyota.
Yeah, no question. I mean, very similar comments. We have been measuring our KPI for some time, and Kevin Butt was in one of the sessions yesterday. He's our lead for environmental overall, holistic for Toyota, and his team works with the global Toyota to set the targets, and we've had targets probably since around 2015. On the logistics side, we're working hard to, of course, work with our logistics partners. We want to work hand in hand with them to help move through this journey, because it's not going to be easy. Some are large, some are small, and have capability. So the key is that we're working with them now to understand what their abilities are and what they're thinking, their strategies are, and it's a partnership. So we need to make sure that they're ready as we go through this. I mean, the bottom line is, capacity to make the equipment and infrastructure is going to set the pace, and some of the regulations that Anu mentioned. It's all those things have to work in tandem to get this moving. California does have some aggressive rules, but honestly, we found is that their targets are not as aggressive as our own internal targets. So if we can hit our own internal targets, we think we can hit those in California. And we have a lot going on in California. We have the fuel cell truck. We're actually trialing it in our port operations on the vehicle side and on the parts side. So we're moving forward.
Absolutely. I flagrantly abused my privilege as moderator with time, but I'm going to do it even just a little bit more. I just want a 30-second answer. I can't count how many years of supply chain experience we have on the panel, let alone life experience. I think it's more years than we can probably fit into the calculator sort of thing. But we mentioned it. It was mentioned earlier various times in the conference of challenging time to be in this industry, but what an exciting time in supply chain and logistics. And I just thought, given your years of experience, what, perhaps in 30 seconds or less, what is exciting you most now when you look ahead in the next, let's look beyond the immediate kind of Port of Long Beach issues, et cetera, but in the supply chain over the next 5-10 years. Chris, I'd like to start with you.
Well, one thing I probably repeat too much with recruits or candidates that we're bringing into the organization, my favorite question is, do you like puzzles? Because if you don't like puzzles, you don't need to be in supply chain, because we've gone from two-dimensional chess to four-dimensional chess almost, it seems like, in the past year and a half. So it's, to me, that's what's exciting about it. It's something new, it's something different every day. And I think people, especially the younger generation that are coming into it, that's something that hopefully they're attracted to, right? And something that I feel like, if that's what interests you, then this is the place to be. So, yeah.
Anu, what's exciting you most?
The tongue-in-cheek answer is retirement. Right? When I deal with this stuff. The real 30-second answer is the importance that supply chain plays in the total business. The credibility that we bring to it, and have a seat at the table, right? So it's not a forgotten back room, dirty, high cost type of thing, right? People coming into the business these days are going to play a significant role in a company's overall performance.
Well, doing that's going to make playing golf retirement even more satisfying. So, good luck. George, what about you?
I think for the general public, and again, as we mentioned, our execs of the past, the supply chain's been this unknown thing. It's been the guys in the back room working, and don't mind the man behind the curtain type mentality. And now everybody's asking about supply chain. What's going on with supply chain? Everybody's feeling the effects of supply chain, and it's really brought it to the forefront. So, recently out of college, there's been supply chain management programs. It's been wonderful. We've been pulling it together. But now what I'm most interested in is, with all the talk that's going on now and all the opportunities that are out there, how many more recruits are we going to see? How many more people are going to ask the question, what is supply chain? I might be interested in supply chain. And it's something that's tangible. You can sink your teeth into it. It's physical, right? So I'm excited about the future of recruits and the volume of recruits that I see coming forward.
Fantastic. And with the labor shortages, we know that's going to be a fun challenge too. So.
That's right.
Steve, to close us out, exciting you most?
Yeah, I think, George, everybody's comments are great. I think it's, all those things are really exciting. And, I'm just thinking, here as you guys are talking, the vehicle technology, the connected vehicle and how that's going to impact supply chain. There's so many things that could happen with that, and it could change the way our organizations sit and, the type of recruit we have. All those things are going to be really interesting to see and very exciting over the next several years. So I'm pretty excited about that.
And so are we. And on that note, though, I want to thank our panel, Chris Stiles, George Grahovac, Steve Brown, and Anu Goel for this fantastic discussion and your contribution in this session and others, for Chris and Anu, and also for engaging with us over the last 2 days and otherwise. So thanks again to you all.
Thank you.